Yo, Flexcast, we are back with our next guest, man, and we talk to movers, shakers, and tastemakers. I'm glad to have a fellow podcaster for this segment because this is actually a person that knows what we go through to put this content together for y'all. So please introduce yourself and let the people know what you do, and we'll get right into it.
Hey, I'm Jazz. I'm one of the hosts of Bitches Love Sports. Actually, I'm an interim solo host because life be lifing.
We normally have three. Our third host under the weather, yeah.
So y'all get it. Yeah, most of our content you can find on Spotify. Lately, we've been doing a lot of YouTube stuff. And since it's me by myself, the best way to get our new stuff is on YouTube. But yeah, I cover all sports. And then lately, I've been doing a lot with Cowboys Nation because they're so active on Twitter, so active on YouTube. And the content creator community of that team has kind of claimed me as one of their own.
Ooh.
So on YouTube,
this is a good year to be claimed.
Okay. Yes. It's a lot of Cowboy stuff, but also some college football stuff. And then I've got some new pieces coming out soon about the WNBA and flag football. So, yeah.
Hey, everybody clap it up for Jazz. She came here today to chop it up on the Flexcast. And I wanted to talk about one, I love that you guys named the podcast Bitches Love Sports. I want you to talk about your love for sports and how it developed into an actual, podcast.
How it developed into a podcast was kind of random. It was something that happened really during the pandemic. I had a friend, well, I shouldn't say had. I have a friend who lives in Memphis, and we would talk every day, especially during the pandemic. Everybody was bored. And one day he was like, you really need to start a podcast because just the way that you talk about these sports, you just go back and forth from analyzing the game to objectifying these men. He's like, it's kind of funny. He's like, but I think there are people who would actually appreciate that as opposed to me who I just kind of listen to you. And the name actually just came from me going through several names. And I don't know if anybody remembers at the time, but those bitches love memes were really popular.
Yes.
One of the funniest ones, my dad, rest in peace, I would tell him about them because he was blind, so he couldn't see social media. And one of them that he thought was hilarious, I read to him, I was like, it said something like, get that bitch a plunger because bitches love bringing up old shit. And and he just thought those were so funny. And so one day I was like, I think I'm gonna name it Bitches Love Sports. And he was like, that's controversial, but if anybody could pull that off and make that work, I think you could. And it was one of the last conversations he and I had before he passed away.
That's
and
special.
so I stuck with the name and just tried to make the podcast something that I felt he would be proud of. And so yeah, I've always loved sports since I was a kid.
Did you ever play?
Yeah, I played various sports. I'm not naturally athletically inclined, I will say. I played soccer in high school. It was a struggle. I love being active. I'm a personal trainer, so I love fitness, all of that. But just actually being good at sports, I was never a star. So I played soccer in high school. I played rugby in college in both.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's rare.
You're rev.
In both high school and college, I ended up being more of a band nerd. When it comes to the music stuff, I was on it. I was a drum major in high school. I was a drum major in college. And then when I graduated, and one day a friend convinced me to try roller derby, and roller derby was a sport that I stuck with the longest, and so I got best at.
And for those of y'all who don't know, this is fighting on skates.
I was going to
Pretty
say,
much. That's a good way to
guys
describe
are strong to do that.
No, because some people are like, what's roller derby? I've been to a roller derby match. That's intense.
Yeah, it is. It very much is. And so that's the sport that I've stuck with the longest. It's the one that I love the most. But as far as watching, I like the competitive nature of it. I like watching athletes do their thing, obviously. But I've also found that a lot of athlete stories are just so inspiring, regardless of the sport, regardless of I actually met one of my favorite players on the Cowboys was a receiver who ended up being waived. His name was Simi Fehoko. And one of the reasons why I liked him, though, was because he was so resilient and he was so tenacious, and he kind of knew that he was never going to be a first-string receiver, but he was just determined to do what he loved. And I just thought the way that he just kept bouncing back in terms of, not making certain teams or being cut and having to really fight his way to the top, fight for playing time, fight to even be on a practice squad. But he always, even though he knew he had to work harder and do more than other people to get recognized, he kept trying, and he accomplished his dream of getting in the league and has been on several teams, but you never hear him talk down about himself.
Right.
And so whether it's a person like that who has to just kind of keep trying, or a person like Dak Prescott who's been through a hell of a lot and is a star. You just see a lot of inspiring stories. You see things happen, play out in the world of sports that just you never really see in common interactions.
And I also think that, because you brought up the Jordan Poole incident, I think that's very different. Punching your teammate at a closed team practice is very different than backhanding an opponent on a televised game.
Yes, 100%.
So I don't think those punishments should match or be similar in any way. But I also think, because this is recent.
Yeah.
The Rudy Gobert incident was not that long ago. He choked another player and received a 5-game suspension.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that what you're speaking on is people just not liking the punishment that he gets for it. So it feels like he is getting away with it. And then he goes on his podcast because Draymond, just like you and I, Draymond has a podcast. So he goes on his podcast and pops it, and it's like, well, like what really happened here, you know?
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, as far as the indefinite suspension, there are two ways to look at it. And I think when people looked at it from a punitive standpoint, as far as like, okay, he's being punished by not knowing when he'll ever be able to play again.
Mm-hmm.
I think there were some people who felt like that was extreme because if you don't know when he'll be back, he might never be back. And I think some people are like, no, he deserves to know when he'll be back, right? But when you listen to Steve Kerr, for example, talk about the indefinite suspension, he talks about it more from a place of support, from a place of Draymond Green needing help. And listening to how he talked about it, it actually makes sense. And I'll give you a personal example. You know, I had a situation occur in October that just kind of rocked my world as far as like my personal life. And at the time, I kind of gave myself a time limit, like, okay, this is a lot to deal with, but you know, I'll be able to bounce back in so much time, right?
Correct.
But within that amount of time, there were a couple of other things that ended up playing out that
like
I did not exactly. And so let's say I had an employer, or as a matter of fact, not an employer, but I do write for Inside the Star. It's a Cowboys-centric blog.
Hey, nice.
And they don't pay my full salary. So, like, the editor's kind of flexible. I sent my editor a message, and I was like, I don't know when I'm going to be able to start writing the number of articles that I normally write. And I was like, what are my options? And he was like, look, just take your time. Whenever you're ready, we'll be here. Let me know, right?
That's supportive.
Exactly. And so it gave me the opportunity to just do whatever I felt like I needed to do to get balanced and then come back and actually contribute regularly. So when you look at it from that perspective, and you listen to Steve Kerr and Steph Curry both talk about not only about like, oh, Draymond Green needs to cut out this behavior. Steph Curry talked about Draymond Green as a man, as a father, as a husband, and as a basketball player.
Humanized him a little bit.
Yeah, and he said that Draymond Green needed to like fix things in that order.
Correct.
Steve Kerr also talked about Draymond Green needing help. When the GM of the Warriors first talked about the situation, one of the things he said was, we think the healthiest thing for Draymond is for him to stay around. So everybody's talking about Draymond's health and helping him. And so it sounds like a little bit something deeper than we need to punish this guy for doing something wrong. And so when you look at it from that perspective, and the reports came out today that said, oh, Draymond Green is going to start counseling today. So that suggests he hasn't been receiving counseling.
Correct.
And maybe he hasn't been seeing a sports psychologist, right? And so when you think of it from that perspective, it sounds like maybe there's something deeper going on that people within the Warriors organization are aware of when it comes to Draymond Green and his behavior and his mental state. And they understand, like, it might be 3 weeks for him to get it together. He might uncover some things through talking to this counselor that it takes him longer than that to get through.
Yeah.
So however long it takes for him to get to the point where he can come back and rejoin the team and we don't have to worry about these things happening, that's how long it's going to take. So from that perspective, I support the indefinite suspension. I don't expect it to be forever.
Yusuf Nurkic was like, hey, this brother needs help.
Yeah.
And so I think if we reached, kind of an apex with this, I also wanted to know while you're here, what other things do you do in like maybe the sports? You mentioned being a writer, but is there anything else you do in the sports space that people should know about?
It's mostly the podcast and my writing.
Okay.
Some people consider my tweets to be content, especially as of late.
Okay, that's perfect.
Where my videos have kind of slowed down, but I definitely still tweet a lot and get a lot of interaction on Twitter. And then I also roller derby is kind of on, everything's on a break. Roller derby is kind of on a break too, but I was coaching roller derby for a while, and so that's something that I really enjoy that I might go back to. But yeah, mostly the podcast, YouTube, and Twitter is what I do, and writing.
Let people know where they can find you on Instagram.
On Instagram, it's Bitches Love Sports Pod. On Twitter, it's Bitches Love Sports, but it has to be shorter. So it's BTCHESLUV Sports.
Okay.
The easiest way to find everything is to go to bitcheslovesports.com.
Hey, a
and
website.
find
I love that. I love a
Yes.
website.
Just find the links to the YouTube, to the Twitter, to the Instagram. That's the easiest way to find everything.
And anytime there's something crazy going on in sports, I'm going to reach out. If you're available, please come by, chop it up with us. If you ever want me to come talk on your podcast, I'd love to. I love
Definitely.
the name Bitches Love Sports. So thank you so much for coming by. And Flexcast, don't go anywhere. We'll be back with our next guest. Yo.